Good evening and welcome to Aclass. It's lovely to have you all here, and we've got a fantastic panel joining us today. Aclass is our series of masterclasses for new and emerging podcasters, and it's so great to have so many of you here, and I'm sure lots of you watching in the recording afterwards. This is our first ever masterclass for Asian voices, and so we covered all kinds of underrepresented groups over the past year and a half of these masterclasses, both in London and New York, and now virtually. And particularly this one, we're looking at Asian hosts, podcasts from Asian producers, but also just podcasts about the Asian experience in particular. And I know that's a very broad church, but we're going to be looking at all kinds of different examples today and learning all kinds of tips and tricks to how to make your podcast better. So normally we would do this at the Acast offices. We'd be all around a table together. We'd have some food and drink. We'd be networking and all kinds of business. But this time we're going to be doing this all virtually, trying to answer a single question, which is how to make a great podcast. And we've only got an hour to try and answer that almighty question. But we'll try and give you those tips, tricks, and some inspiration from our amazing panel about how you can do that, and also answering any of your questions if you want to pop them in the chat as well. So first of all, let me introduce our illustrious panel. So first of all, my name is Sam, or in the context of Asian Voices, my name is Samir Shtabi. I'm the content director at Acast, and before you ask, I am half Welsh, half Iranian, hence my Asian background. We at Acast look after 20,000 podcasts around the world. That's 265 million listens every single month. So thankfully, I only look after the UK and Ireland part of those. That's a lot of shows, but clearly it's never been a better time to launch a podcast. It's a really amazing time with lots of people launching shows, and it's a time where people are more engaged with podcasts than ever before. So on that subject, we've also got Jen Dollard, who is our Senior Content Development Manager for Ireland. You want to say hello, Jen?
Hello, everybody.
There she is. She's actually joining us from Ireland today. It's very lucky. We're going across the Irish Sea for this. So as part of our development team, Jen picks and chooses and scours for the very best podcasts in Ireland, and also develops them and makes sure they're marketed really well. And so she's got lots of great insight. Plus, she's a bit of an audio expert, and she'll be talking about the best ways to record your podcasts, particularly now we're all in lockdown and we're doing that all remotely. And then let's turn to our special guests. So we have Poppy J and Rubina Pabani. Where are you? There they are. Hello. These are the hosts of Brown Girls Do It Too from BBC Asian Network. How are you doing, guys?
Great. Thanks for having us.
Live from Leighton.
Live from Leighton.
Live from Leighton. And we also have Dharminder Dhanjal. Where are you? Where are you, D? There he is. There he is. So D is the founder, director, and producer at Audio Culture, which is the producers behind the Reggie Yates podcast and Dane Baptiste Questions Everything, amongst many, many others. And he's also, as of next week, going to be a lecturer at Point Blank Music School. So we're going to be his first ever lecture.
It is exciting times. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me, guys.
And clearly the one with the best microphone. So
yeah, no.
You're showing us all up. So just want to summarize what Aclass is. So Aclass, we've been running it for 18 months, and it's our way of sharing knowledge. So we have 7 people in our UK and Ireland team, and we do not want to be the gatekeepers of all the knowledge in podcasting. So we are experts in what we do, but we want everyone to be able to learn from this. And we particularly want to see more underrepresented groups in podcasting. We want to see more Asian podcasters and more Asian producers in the, that big Apple podcast chart. And the best way of doing that is to give away our knowledge. And so this is a perfect opportunity to do that. And the best thing about podcasts for us is that podcasts can be about anything. They can be by anyone, for anyone, about something really broad, something really specific. And so this is the perfect medium for you guys to tell amazing stories. And on that note, before we get going, we will also email this to you guys after today, but there is a special Aclass code you can use on acast.com if you want to start your podcast with us for free. So that code is Acast-Aclass-exclusive. That's Acast-Aclass-exclusive. We'll email that to you afterwards, but that's a way for you to start with Acast for free, and you can learn everything today and get going straight away. You have no more excuses. So let's get going with our amazing special guests, Poppy and Rubina. Hello.
Hi.
Hi. So Brown Girls Do It Too. What an amazing year you guys have had. So hold on, there's something missing from this slide. Oh, there you go. There you go.
Hello.
not just one award, 2 awards. So Best Sex and Relationship Podcast plus Podcast of the Year. So pretty incredible few months for you guys. So this show is obviously about sex, and defies stereotypes because you guys are brown. How dare you talk about these things at the same time? So we're going to play a little clip that I think beautifully illustrates the show. So this obviously is super smarty content warning, etc., etc. But this is a little example of what you would hear if you heard the intro to a typical episode.
This is a sexy new podcast from the BBC Asian Network, and it's unlike anything that you would have heard before because we are three brown women who have extramarital relationships, unless it's a dry month, and we're totally wanting to talk about it. Dirty, sweaty, and sometimes downright disgusting. Poppy, I'm looking at you. Right here, direct into your ears.
However you identify and whatever your sexual orientation, you need to listen to this podcast because it's about the realities of brown girls having all kinds of sex.
So we probably do need a trigger warning because we swear, we get deep down and dirty, and some listeners may find that offensive.
Yeah, we'll be speaking in detail about sex. Why? Well, firstly, why not? And secondly, and more importantly, the Asian community has a bit of a rap for being humble and modest and even prude. And I'm here to tell you that the three of us are none of those things.
I love that dirty laugh I had to cut in the middle of there, which was very appropriate. So first things first, one of the most extraordinary things about this for me is that you guys didn't know each other before this podcast. So how did you guys meet and what's the story behind the podcast coming to be?
You go first. You go first.
Well, we were like put together. So I podcast amateurly outside of this, and a BBC Asian Network producer like listened to what I was doing, and he listened to an episode I did about sex. And he was like, there's something
What?
in this.
Brown woman? Sex? Ah! Is I can imagine if I'm doing a recon, is what probably would
Well, he was 100%. If you know him, that's it. And yeah, he just kind of was really interested in that as like as a jumping off point. And then he was like, well, I need to pair her up with like a bunch of other people who are doing that. And yeah.
So our names sort of got bandied around, and then I first met my lovely co-host in the BBC canteen, sexy, where we were like, "Hi, girls," and you know when you like size each other, like, yeah, what up? And then we were talking about our vaginas, so
yeah, very
quickly actually, and really surprisingly, quite easily as well. We were very comfortable around each other, so that is how it all happened.
And so do you think the fact you didn't know each other before made it easier to talk about like the most intimate things you could possibly be talking about?
100%.
Yes,
yeah, because like we're taking a listener on the same journey we're all going through. So
Yeah.
like while we're getting to know each other, the listeners also like, how are these girls? And they're like learning about us as well. I think and yeah, I think it was really good that we
I listened back to a few of the episodes, and there were moments where Rubina is about to say something, and we're not going, but we're like, come on, it's unfiltered. We may as well get it out now. I just don't think you would have got that if we were like two friends, because there are so many things that is unsaid that's implied. You know when you don't finish off each other's sentences, whereas the listener is finding out as we are for the first time. So we were like, oh my God, what? Wow. And then we had so many people listening saying, there were things that you said that I just couldn't believe you were saying it, because it was like borderline cringe, but I was just like, oh God, they've said it, it's out in the ether. So definitely unfiltered, and I think works because we were three blank canvases, each discovering each other for the first time, sexually and in other ways.
Within that, did you guys have much time to get to know each other before you recorded your first episode, or were you kind of straight into the studio, get to know each other as you're recording?
So maybe I gave you the like tabloid version. There was this one meeting, guys, in the middle where we were like, look, let's meet in the pub.
Yeah.
Bond, get to know each other, figure out who we are.
I think it's just
it was 2 hours. It was like
one pub session with somebody, you know whether it's clicking or not. And we just had like a really great connection that we and our friends out of it, which we just, and I'm really grateful that we got to do that and become mates as well, which is nice.
And just got a couple of awards out of it as well.
Well, you know,
So what was your process then? So like, how did you prepare for a recording beforehand? So like, did you discuss like, this is the kind of subject we're going to cover today? Or did you decide I'm going to reveal this on mic for the first time and see your reactions live?
Do you want the truth?
Although, yeah, I mean, this is like I'm really glad this event is for like people who want to get into podcasting, because we definitely feel like we were those people. And I've been amateurly podcasting for ages, and Poppy had never done a podcast before. She didn't even know what a podcast was before. And actually, the whole process of like the editorial of what we were going to say was so organic. Like, what should we talk about next week? What's important to you? And it was so raw and unfiltered, and just it is just a chat. So as far as like scripting, planning, all of that stuff, our producer Rayhan, shout out, he definitely did some structuring and definitely told us when to shut up because we're really loud, but it was very chill it was just record, let's just see what happens.
That's literally how it was. And we were like, next week we would wrap up and be like, next week what are we talking about? Masturbation? Yeah, cool, all right, fine. That is genuinely yeah. And then it was like, oh, next week what do we do? Oh, online dating, yeah. And very minimal planning, which is great. It was good for us, obviously. But yeah, very raw, very unfiltered, and we just kind of, the conversation meandered, and obviously Rayhan was there to kind of rein us back in if we went off on a tangent back to the kind of main thread of the conversation. But I think very minimal planning, which we were amazed how we won Best Sex and Relationship and Best Overall Podcast. We were like,
it's just natural skill and natural talent
that went into it was the script, was the kind of, hi, I'm Poppy, hi, I'm Rubina. That's literally
that's kind of what you played as well,
and that is the only thing we planned. And when I say plan, we were scribbling it down just before we went on air.
So what I thought actually, that in terms of like advice for podcasters, we always talk about your trailer as being a really important part of it, and that is actually your intro to each episode. You do different intros like that, but that actually could have been your trailer. So your trailer was 4 or 5 minutes long. It was a really great summary of what you were going to expect. And we always recommend for podcasters, the trailer is where most people will go to first. And they will always think of that as like, okay, I'm going to find my new podcast. I only have 3 or 4 podcasts in my life at any one time. I need to be sold. And just, I think you did a really good job of showing the tone, showing the kind of subjects you're going to cover. And in your actual trailer, you give a really clear call to action, which is like subscribe, which lots of people forget to do. Like, it's important to tell people to actually do that subscribing thing, so they actually listen every week. But anyway, away from more technical things, the subject of the show, obviously, sex and relationships, you'd think that wouldn't be so distinctive, but actually it is incredibly distinctive. Do you think you ever heard these kind of discussions before from people who look like you in any kinds of media?
Yeah, I mean, a great question, because like, I don't think so. No, we were just saying earlier, we were like, who would we have seen? And I was like, maybe it's the tiny aubergine in Goodness Gracious Me was the moment where I was like, something there. But no,
that was a huge blast from the past there. Thank you.
I know. Shout out to Goodness Gracious Me. No, I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, not in the way that we did it. I think we talked about it graphically. We were funny and entertaining. I think often sometimes it can be quite like not worthy, but worthy. What you must do, and we were just like, so no, to answer
we did it in like a comedy way, you know. We didn't want to take ourselves too seriously. We're not sex advisors or sexperts, as they call them. We are people who have lives and are flawed and are messy and are broken in many ways, and we just wanted it to be that.
We periodically every 20 minutes we did say, don't take advice from us, people. Don't do that. Don't do what we just said. So yeah,
because I think usually you'd hear these kind of things maybe in a podcast and you'd go, oh, that's probably from a sex expert, as you say, and it's like doctors telling you what to do and not do, whereas you're very clearly not that. It's about lived experience.
Yeah, lived experience. Yes.
But we were talking earlier this morning, actually, when we were preparing for this, about how podcasts are perfect for risque content because no one knows who you're listening to. In the same way that like 50 Shades of Grey did incredibly well on like when people were reading on their Kindles on the tubes and no one knew what they were reading. Exactly the same with a podcast. No one needs to know. And we were talking about It Gals, which is a show in Ireland which Jen works with. So obviously very similar sort of cultural background in the sense that it's very conservative, an Irish Catholic country. But It Gals also has had a similar sort of trajectory where it's hugely popular because they're so unfiltered.
Yeah, like the thing about, I always make a joke that, you know, in Ireland we have more sex podcasts than any other country because we're just so glad we can finally talk about it. I mean, I went to 2 convent schools. So that it's still not a conversation I've had in my household, and I'm 29. We're never going to have it now, you know. And lots of podcasts in Ireland have come from that as well. And you know what, It Gals, Jenny and Lindsay are so similar to you guys. Like, Lindsay especially comes from a really conservative background, you know, so it's really lovely, and it's definitely it's something we love in Ireland, but it's something we would only listen to in headphones when nobody knows we're listening to it. So I think
Us too, Jen, us too. Don't
I was going to ask, what for something like this, was that one of the reasons you thought maybe podcasting was the best platform for it, because it was quite intimate?
Yeah, 100%. I think you can speak directly into someone's ear in that wonderfully intimate way that podcasts like design around it, which is so great. But also, you know, this, I mean, I know we're on video right now, but it's really nice not to be recorded on video and just to feel like someone's recording your audio because you do just reveal more. You're a bit more open, and you speak differently if you know you're not being watched, if you're just being heard. So 100%, I thought the audio, the podcasting and the sex bit for us was like that we could do something here. It felt like ripe for that.
Yeah, I feel like if this was like a YouTube series, it would feel very different.
Yeah,
I think you probably would be a little bit less, you'd be more guarded. You'd be less
more guarded, you're just showy. And also, like, even when I'm like, you just constantly every 20 seconds you do duck face, don't you? You're like, yeah. So as I was masturbating, welcome to my show. You know what I mean? You just, it's like we do it on every Zoom call. You're like, yeah. So I'm so glad actually it was just our voice and our stories and very stripped back. So yeah, very grateful. I mean, they did film a few bits and pieces, but yeah.
You mentioned as well that sorry, Sam, I was gonna say you mentioned as in some of your episodes that you feel you were representing people similar to you who couldn't ever and still can't talk about sex. Do you get people sending stories into you that they want to tell, but you're the only people they can tell them to?
We get a lot of DMs. I mean, we don't have like an email address for the podcast, but we are doing that for series 2. But we get a lot of DMs of people telling us like the ways in which it helped them, or sharing anecdotes with us, or asking us for like advice, which again, we told you we're not doing. But like, you know, just like cool people.
It was really overwhelming. Like, obviously we got loads of trolls, but screw them, we don't care about them. But we got loads of young women and a few guys, but women DMing us saying, I wish I'd had this when I was growing up. You know, you make it sound really like less embarrassing. We had one woman who said, I can now look at my husband, you know, you've changed my life. Honestly, it's just incredibly supportive messages from young girls reaching out to us saying, I wish I had something like this, and just normalizing it, making it feel like it's not something that we should be ashamed about, because obviously that's a big hang up in our communities. Women and sex equals, you know, car crash, obviously. So I think they were really grateful for that. So we had a lot of messages of support for sure.
And so what was the reaction when the show launched? Because it wasn't a huge high profile podcast launch.
No.
So how
we
did
did 6 episodes and we were like, no one's going to listen to this, and we just put it on our CV, no big deal, and then move on. I mean, here we are with 2 awards talking to you guys. So
so how did it
this happen?
grow organically? Like, was there like, what did your friends and family say? Did you have people getting in touch? What was the sort of the early days of the podcast?
So we did 6 episodes last year at the BBC, and in different times as we're all living in our restricted homes now. But and it was really exciting, and you know, we did get quite a lot of press because people did think it was odd that we were doing it and maybe contrived, you know, like a sex sells, good luck doing that kind of thing. And you're always going to get people who are negative, and actually probably good to start with a negative, because you know, you think everything's good and we're really happy and we've got this podcast and we won this award. Like, we had a lot of shit, from people online and also
people online. My 2 sisters stopped talking to me. They're now talking to me, but it's like stakes were high, definitely. So yeah, we had to take that into consideration, and obviously all the troll and the slut shaming and stuff, which again doesn't affect you, but it just opens up your eyes to the fact that clearly there was a need for this podcast because people are, you know, like guarded about it, or you know, slut shaming young women into talking about sexual relationships. So clearly a need, but yeah, it was definitely stakes are higher, I think, for us, for sure.
And how did you use social media in any way, or were people finding you? Because we always recommend you should use social media. You should take it, you know, you should harness it. You should post clips. You can post audiograms, which are like the animated, like, you know, when you see waveforms across your cover art. They're all the kind of things you can do to deliberately engage people on social media. Did you ever do one of those things, or did you kind of like it all happened?
Yeah, I mean, that's 100% what we have been doing now, because you're right. We've noticed that the more you do that, the more you get listeners and the more you get interactions. Like, we were on that learning curve, just probably with everyone else listening, to know that is what you should be doing. But to be honest, at the top, like the BBC did invest in us, and actually you do need a little bit of backing, and also word of mouth still on podcasts, I think, is the way to go. People were coming and telling me, have you heard this? And I'm like, that is me.
Did you do like a click finger?
Which is just that's just so great when that happens, right? Because you're no, that's brilliant. You're recommending me something that you think you like, and you're my mates. That's wicked.
I was in a slightly tricky situation in that I work in documentaries, and I just had to use a different, name. It's odd. I couldn't push it because I was like, genuinely, if I'm doing a documentary about the Asian community and they Google me and I'm talking about sex as openly as I am, that access is gone. So I probably didn't plug it as much as I could / should. But season 2, it's about to change.
And it's scary. It's scary if you're making a podcast to have your voice out to the public. Like, and if you're starting something, you're like, oh my God, what if nobody likes me? What's gonna happen? So you're doing it all with a bit of trepidation. So everything's like, should I push it? Should I really be proud of it? But you should. Like, your voice is so important, and everybody should hear it. And that's what we've learned by doing this.
Yeah, being a podcaster is super exposing because you're in front of a microphone. It's not quite as exposing as video. I think we've already touched on that. Like, you can be, I think, a bit more candid and honest with yourself. But I think social media is like, it's the way to get the words out there about your show. We always talk about this. Discovery is probably the most difficult thing about podcasts. There's a million podcasts out there. I think literally a million podcasts out there now, and finding them is near impossible. So you need people to either plug it in Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or find it on social media, or for friends and family to be like, look, this is a great new show. So the more you can do to say, to give a great clear elevator pitch about what your show is about at the beginning of your show, or to when you share clips, it's really representative of what the show is about and it becomes really shareable, all the better. So I think you're learning, that learning curve is working beautifully for you. So let me cover some more podcasts that we've sort of picked out as being fantastic formats, but also having some lovely cover art. So take a look at this for some lovely inspiration. So we've also got, so for example, Feel Better, Live More. So that's Dr. Rangan Chatterjee's podcast. We think that is the biggest wellness podcast in Europe. It's one of our Acast dearest favorite podcasts, right the way through to shows like Girl Chat. And that cover art is so delicious. It looks like I want to eat it. It's so chewy. And there's another Asian network show, Scottistan, which I think does exactly what it says on the tin. So these are sort of just some amazing podcasts, but they all have very different formats, have different kind of stories to tell. So obviously Dr. Chachi is talking about wellness. Hip Hop Saved My Life is all about music and music culture. D, you work on shows like Reggie Yates' podcast, which is like, you were telling us it's like a 3-hour long show.
Oh, Jesus.
You cut it down to an hour. So how do you decide how to cut something down from 3 hours to an hour, and what do you filter out?
So look, there's no real set way at the end of the day. There's a personal standard involved. There's a personal expectation involved, both from you, the producer, and the podcaster. In the case of Reggie, he's very specific, he's very experienced, obviously has a very high standard. So, using him as an example, there was a kind of set format there that I work with. But, in a general way, I think the best way to, I suppose, approach the thinking of when it comes to editing is to always aim for a balanced but concise edit of the conversation. So you don't want too many, let's just say, fatty bits, the bits that aren't really relevant or, playing context to, what the narrative is. Making sure you've got enough personality exuberance in the podcast. So what I mean by that is, as well as the podcast's main narrative being delivered through the conversation, really cool moments of wit, quality moments of banter, which again, work in context with the conversation, are really important because they allow the personality of the hosts and the guests to come through, which allows the listener to build a relationship with the people. The format features are really important. So, your standard intros, your standard outros, but making them familiar parts of the podcast. So I suppose in another way, making them generic, having your set intro and your set outro sonically and literally, just gives your podcast a bit of a trademark sound, as well as any special features in the podcast. So for example, with Reggie, sorry, I'm suffering from a bit of a cold, so I've got a bit of a frog in my throat.
Oh, it's very husky. It's
He
great.
always likes to speak about. He's got this feature called Reg and Bubba, which is one of the co-hosts. Go to the cinema where they review, the latest film out, and for that they have a little theme song that they sing, which I then kind of edit some bed music to, and it becomes a little kind of special feature in itself. And Reggie always gets a massive reaction to that through his DMs, which is pretty cool. So it's always nice if you've got ideas for special features. And you've got some kind of traction in terms of people liking them, definitely roll with them, definitely expand them out. And the one that's most important to me from like a producer's point of view is transparent editing. And again, it's a personal standard. You don't have to be the world's best editor, but I'd definitely recommend putting a bit more time into learning the art of editing. What I mean by that is you want to make sure your edit sounds completely transparent. Like it doesn't sound like it's been edited. It sounds like a seamless conversation, which, so far, touch wood, I've managed to do, which is pretty cool. The reason why I say that is because there's nothing like listening to something which sounds natural, and I've heard the antithesis of natural, and I just know people can do better. They have the ability to do better. So why not learn how to do better? If you're doing a complete DIY job, in terms of recording, producing, etc., definitely put time into making sure your edits make you sound the best you possibly can and are conveyed as possibly the best you possibly can be. So they're my 4 main aspects of producing, I'd say.
Because I think you're completely right. You can have, on one end of the spectrum, you can have the Joe Rogans of the world who are 3-4 hours long and they don't edit. And then you can go all the way down the other end of the spectrum when it's too edited and it might sound clipped and
exactly
sanitize the personality out of it. If you need to be somewhere in the middle where you leave in like the funny bits or when things go wrong.
But equally, I can imagine a lot of Joe Rogan's early podcasts having some, really, I suppose, not pointless, but just lull moments. He's like 1,500 episodes in now. And I'm pretty sure that those guys, they prep their conversations. They have a topic list. They spend the whole day preparing for the conversation. And the guests they have on know what they're doing essentially. So there's a lot of prep that goes into those 3 hours, I think, as well as, free flow. Preparation is the key for sure. If you want to go for the long form and not edit, prepare even more.
Absolutely. Rubina, you've got, like you were saying, a whole range of podcasts that you do on the side, as your side hustles. Do you want to give us a little taste of what those shows are? I'd like to show the range of formats that you have at your fingertips.
Sure, yeah. So I have a podcast called Das Podcast, which I do with my friend Charlie Braids Price. We both work in television. It's a podcast about being a feminist and working in television, which actually sometimes has really interesting stories to tell. And we worked really hard to get funny jingles, and it's very silly. It's very formatted and it's very fact heavy. We use a lot of headlines when we talk about stuff, and it's quite satirical. And then I have another podcast called 2 Shades of Brown that I do with Satma Tarawali, where we talk about what the difference is between being black and brown in living in the UK. And again, it's quite free flow. We always have a guest on, and we just talk about race, but we keep all of our conversations centered around race. So yeah, they're very fun conversations that I get to have with cool friends.
Doing 3 podcasts and you have a day job. I mean, where do you find the time?
Diary, just Bill Gates here, you know what I mean? 24 hours, just working 24 hours.
That's the hustle.
And so how did you decide the formats of those shows? Like, were they works in progress? We all usually think that podcast listeners are very forgiving. They don't mind when you adapt as you go and you learn what bits they like and what bits you like. How did you decide on those different formats?
Well, that's just like a really interesting example because we were very structured and we took a lot from American, and we listened to loads of NPR podcasts, and then we were listening to how they structure things. And how many minutes do you start with that's just like a tease before you get into the meat? And at what point, how many minutes are you in until you introduce a guest? And how many minutes do you edit in the jingles? How many jingles did you have? We were using like formulas, and we were literally like pulling taking podcasts and putting them on a timeline and like marking it out and being like, why does this formula work, and trying to understand it that way. And so Das is almost too formatted because we were so like structured about it. We're like, well, we know that 2 minutes in, that's the drop off point, and maybe we over egged it. But we had a lot of feedback we've done 3 series now, and we had a lot of feedback that when everyone was like, chill out, stop with the jingles, stop with the ends, like let this breathe a bit more, and we had a lot of feedback that pushed us to change stuff from friends who are listening. So, and we evolved that way.
And I hope that's really encouraging feedback for people who are listening today, because as you learn to podcast, like no one's podcast sounds the same after episode 100 as it does on episode 1. Like everyone evolves and changes what they talk about, how they talk about it, the structure. So you just learn as you go, and I think that's a really great example of how you can do that. I wanted to give an example of a show beyond these fantastic examples here, which was actually brought to us by a colleague of ours. So there's a guy in our sales team, so we're an advertising company as well, called Austin. He's in our global yield manager, if he's watching, hello. And he was talking to us about shows that really speak to his experience. So he actually showed us his DNA map that he got done when he did a DNA test thing. And he showed us that he's literally 50% South Asian, 50% European, most of that being Irish and Scottish. And he was talking about how when he grew up, he saw himself as sort of this dual nationality fusion, because he looked a certain way, but then grew up in a predominantly white community in London. And so he said that this was the first podcast that he listened to, which seemed to speak to his very particular experience. And so Rise to Meet You is a fantastic show. I really recommend it. Nigel, if you recognize him like I did from social media this summer, he is Uncle Roger, if you've seen that on TikTok. If you haven't, that's just me exposing myself as being a TikTok fan at the age of 30. So here's a little clip. This is, they have a guest on who was a Korean-American adoptee, and they're talking about how the expectations people have when they see you versus what your experience as you grow up can sometimes be quite jarring.
I don't want to speak for them, but with the people that I've spoken with, they've just said that it's this kind of weird dichotomy that they can't really kind of explore until they get to a certain age where it's like, oh, okay, maybe I should go and explore my roots.
No, absolutely. I mean, like if you meet, like it was actually funny because like for the first time, like I was talking to a local, I was doing some, socially responsible socializing in our backyard, and this local hipster girl is like, oh, you're one of those adoptees. That's so amazing. It's like, I was like, oh, we're a footnote. Finally, people know about us, because in America, everyone knows this shit. But, here it's, just the pairing of my face and my voice that comes out of it, it blows motherfuckers' minds sometimes, Oh,
in the UK, you mean?
Absolutely. Oh my God.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, they see a Chinese face, they expect
They expect your voice, Nigel.
Yeah, they expect me. Hey, hello, why? Why? Where is the bathroom? Oh, thank you. They expect Uncle Roger,
God bless you, Uncle Roger. That's really taken me through the summer. So like that's a fantastic experience, example of somebody talking about their lived experience. And what I think is really important about podcasting when you're talking about underrepresented groups is you're not just doing the same show that's rehashed from someone else, you make it authentic to yourself. With Brown Girls Do It Too, how important was it for you guys to talk about your lived experience as Asian women and not just make it be generically about sex that could be a podcast about anyone?
Yeah, really important. I mean, people have this perception of what Asian women are in this country. People have a perception of what women are in this country. So we felt like we had to really just be as authentic as possible. But also, like, we are two Asian women. We are very different women. We have very different upbringings, very different backgrounds. And yet we bring something to each other that there is a point of connection. But I mean, I think like authentically talking about our own stories and realizing, we're actually completely different. We're from like different, different everything. But
I think that's what after doing the 6 episodes, the 3 of us, even though we're like, Sunni Muslim, we were so different. Our experiences were so different from each other's. And that was a bit of an eye-opening experience, definitely.
And in terms of audio generally, when you think of British Asian audio, you think of the BBC Asian network. And so there is clearly like a place to go for this kind of storytelling and this kind of experience. Do you think there needs to be more of this in audio? Because it feels like, it strikes me as there's Asian network and there's, there are some independent podcasts. Do you think there's an appetite for more of this kind of thing?
100%. I mean, if you look at what Galdem have done as a publishing platform for women of color that have just been able to launch and do that, like 100%. Like we probably aren't the British Asian network, the BBC Asian network's like, key listeners, and we probably weren't to start with. They engaged us in new stuff because remember they were out there for the first generation. It's like we're telling second generation stories. It's a whole different game, like because we're more integrated with everything, and we listen to sounds, we listen to NPR. We're more international and outward looking as well. So yeah, I think that there needs to be more. I don't know if it's more platforms, but more just chances
and opportunities, definitely. and more of those experiences reflected. Doesn't matter what your background. And I think maybe in the last 2 or 3 years, it's kind of exploded. But prior to that, it was just very one note, very one dimensional. And you didn't feel like, as a person of color, you could knock on those doors and get those opportunities. In a way, I think the tide is turning now, definitely.
You know what I've got to say? It's really good to see the Asian network playing an edge and taking risks again. Because I remember the first phase of the Asian network. You know, it's a bit safe. You know, but yeah, it's I love it. Fantastic.
So I'm going to talk about the award. You know, it's the elephant in the room, the 2 awards. So it sounded like it was a relatively quiet launch for the show. But then everything would have gone a little bit crazy on that night in July, whenever it was, when you guys won not only the Sex and Relationship Award, which must have been amazing for you guys to be like, oh my God, Gold Award, but then also to have a camera crew turn up at your front door and say, you won the podcast of the year. So tell us about that night.
I just want to, on the record, I've already said this to Rubina. So we were like, coming out of lockdown, but like everyone was giving you side-eye corona in the supermarket if you were like standing near them trying to get salmon or whatever. So I didn't think that I could ask Rubina to come over to the flat to watch it together, because I thought she was doing the whole thing, and I was like, fair play. And because well, not technically, I am an employee of Asian Network, risk assessments and health and safety and all that jazz, they were like, right. So they were like, you know, they want your address. I was like, cool, they obviously want everyone's address, fair play, no problem. And my boss was like, you've got to watch it to the end. You've got to watch it to the end. Because I was just like, once they call me, can I get smashed from the pub? And he's like, no, you must watch it to the end. So I was like, fine. So I hooked it up on the big screen, our category. And Rubina was in the pub. So she was on the phone. I was like, oh, they called us quite early. And then to knock on the door, screaming, you know, really, really excited.
To give some context to that, because this was done not as a conventional award ceremony. You were at home. You were on your webcam and everyone was being cut to live.
Yeah, it was a very innovative way, very innovative kind of post-lockdown, you know, in the midst of COVID way of doing it. Like, I salute them. Very, very, very clever. Slight technical difficulties in South London, but that's another conversation. Everyone's doorstep acceptance speech was amazing, but mine was like, yeah, like frozen, like a joke, but like mostly screaming, so it's fine. They knock on the door, they give the thing, and then I make an acceptance speech on behalf of the girls and the Asian Network. Fine. So like she's heard this story so many times. I'm so sorry. No, so like my partner lays on this feast. I'm like eating jerk chicken, plantain, like makeup's wearing off. I'm looking rough. It's not great. And George the poet is obviously delivering this monologue, which I'm not listening to. Sorry, George, love you. Because I have this one is like, we're going to be a footnote. We're not going to win anything. Like, calm your nerve, like just calm yourself. Calm yourself. So I was like, fine. And then the doorbell goes again. And I open the door, and because the ladies, there's 2 angels that come and they like take photos and do this speech and film you. I thought they'd lost an earring or something. So I was like, they're outside for a good 10 minutes, you know? So I was like, oh, they lost something. And they had the award and the big frame and the fizz and chocolate. And obviously it's this one, it's that one here. That was the big one. And I just started screaming again. And again, you know, South London Wi-Fi did let us down that night. But I think she was sleeping. I went to sleep at 2:00 in the morning, and I emailed her and I was like, wait.
So when it comes to, so you work on a whole range of podcasts.
I do, yes.
What do you find is the most effective way of marketing those podcasts? Like, I imagine each one will have a slightly different approach. For example, with Reggie, what does he do that's particularly distinctive?
It's all dependent on who they are and what field the podcast, I suppose, applies itself to. I mean, like with Reggie Yates, he's Reggie Yates, you know, he's a brand within himself. He's a part of the British institution at the end of the day. Do you know what I mean? So the podcast promotion was literally just him on Instagram. And that was the beauty of the Reggie Yates podcast, because he does another one with Belstaff. You know, Trip was is a very personal initiative. Do you know what I mean? It's completely organic. There isn't any kind of third party PR involved. It's him and his friends, you know, have created this really safe kind of stripped down space just to kind of be them, real mates, real talk, just promoted by him, you know, and it's that level of authenticity which his audience really connect with. And off the back of that, you know, his friends who are involved as well, you know, they've created their own kind of pockets of demographic and audience, which is great. But then on the other side of things, you know, I've got quite a few corporate podcasts. on the books. One of them is called Business Without BS. And it's for a law and accounting firm called Ori Clark. They're like they were the first, maybe they're the only, I don't know, but they were the UK's first like multidisciplinary practice. So they're lawyers and accountants, like this huge firm in Holborn, who have moved into the podcasting space because they can see the value in terms of brand in development and awareness. And it's a great comm strategy as well, internally and externally. So based on that, we've just launched the first series with 16 podcasts in, but we've got a massive PR firm doing all of the legwork for it. And it's working for the type of podcast that is, and towards the audience that they, want to target it to. So yeah, it's all completely based on, the podcast, who they are and their intentions at the end of the day.
And there's something that we talk about a lot at Acast. So in the spirit of trying to give as much of our insight as way as possible. So one thing we try and do a lot of is cross promotion. So
yes.
The best thing about
a lot with Dane. Yeah, with Dane.
Absolutely. So the best thing about cross promotion is that it's free. So you basically, in the same way that YouTubers collab, if you can find another show that's of a similar audience to you, or you think would appeal to the same kind of people, or actually if you want to find someone who's completely opposite to your audience to try and extend it even further, there's all kind of things you can do. You can do guest swaps, so you can feature on their show and vice versa, if that's the right format. You can do an endorsement of each other at the beginning of each episode, or you can do a trailer swap. So if you have that full trailer, you can put that in their feed, you could put that at the beginning of the episode. Basically, cross promotion is absolutely key because it's free. So particularly if you're starting from scratch, we really recommend podcasters give that a go, and Acast as well can help with that if you work with us. Poppy and Rubina, I'm not sure if your mic is going to be working, fingers crossed. I wanted to ask you about, it sounds okay. I wanted to ask about what you've been doing marketing wise since the award. So what kind of stuff have you done? I've seen lots of amazing articles. You've been on the front pages. What kind of stuff have you got prepared for season 2?
In terms of marketing the next year? Well, we've actually been really interested in the video thing, even though I said it, I just feel like it's a different bit of package that you could do. So we've been talking about perhaps having some video elements or like video trailers that could tease stuff that's about to happen. But also we are television people, so we make video anyway, and we would like to use some of our skill to promote what we do. And we've got all sorts of like crazy marketing ideas of like old Indian ladies in saris with like headphones, just making like weird gestures and stuff. Like we're trying to think inventively about how to promote it online without giving any of the content away, and just teasing to what might happen next. I think that's our next big push.
That's such a clever way of thinking about it, trying to tease through your socials and through that kind of video. So looking again at your cover art, I just keep thinking that photo shoot for that cover art must have been the most fun. So, how was that cover art designed? Do you know the story of that, or was that done by Asian Network?
No, we had a really big
we came in with like outfits and ideas and concepts. The girls and we all spoke about what we could do, and then we were like, this was one of them. So of course there was the obligatory aubergines and bananas and shit like that. Thank God that didn't make the cover. But we were like, incognito, but a bit of, slightly on the nose flesh.
I think that's it, isn't it? It's like we are half naked. We're not actually. We literally just took down our shirts and we told the cameraman, come close. We're not afraid. Like, come close. And then the whole thing was, you can come close because we're wearing sunglasses. And it's totally represents what the podcast is about. It's like, yes, it's a sex podcast, but because we're Asian, we still have to be incognito. In some way, we still have to protect our identities. It's like, it just felt so right. We really liked that. I mean, the graphics and stuff and the colors were done by Asian Network, and they just did a good job on everything else. But I mean, we've got Indian jewelry on. We're not not Indian. You can tell we're Indian women. We're Asian women. I'm Indian. But anyway, we're Asian women. Brown AF, and not ashamed. Very proud of our skin color. We have not been lightened, and very proud of who we are. And we just wanted to really represent that kind of like, we're cool, we're good with it.
Your facial expressions are just brilliant, especially yours, Rubina. Sold. Done. I mean, subscribe.
Because the cover art is like the most important thing. to reach new podcasts, it can be very easy to think of that, it's very throwaway, particularly with audio, that it's not important. But people often do extremely elaborate cover art, and it's very detailed and intricate, and it's really small. But actually, you've got to think that people usually see this on their phone screen, literally the size of their thumbnail, and scroll past it super quickly. So it needs to be really in your face. And I think this does an incredible job of just summarizing what that show is. And so I'm so pleased you said that you had thought it through, because if it had been a happy accident, that would have been just remarkable. Well, one other thing we want to talk about before we go over to the technical stuff is episode descriptions. So this is a personal bugbear, and one that it's like the key bit of advice I would always give to new podcasters is to make sure your descriptions count. So when you do your descriptions, you can write as much as you like, you can add links to it, all that kind of business. But often, literally 95% of the time, people will start their descriptions with the same sentence. It'll be, in this episode of the podcast, I am going to talk about this. And then they'll do that over and over and over again. And because it will be truncated, that will be the only 6 words you will see. So my key bit of advice, if I was going to give any today, would be to think about your descriptions, try and front load it with as much information that's really enticing as you can, and to think about search, because you want people to be able to find your show within Google search, within Apple Podcasts, and try to make it as buzzy as possible. Doing clickbaity titles is not a bad thing in podcasting, it's good. So I'm going to hand over to Jen, particularly to talk about production. There are so many things to be thinking about when it comes to production now, because most of us are going to be recording from home. So actually, as part of normal Aclass, we offer all of our attendees a chance to record in our studio, because it's most people don't have the setup to do it at home. Now we're flipping that around. Most people aren't going to studios, and most people are buying their own kits. So Jen, what have your thoughts been around how people have adapted to at-home recording? We've seen our podcasts do incredibly well.
They've done they have really done so well. I was just thinking about, I cut my teeth in national radio in Ireland, and I messed up just about every element of a national radio show you can possibly imagine. I mean, I had people cursing on air. I had terrible edits. I've learned everything the really hard way, and I really want to, along with Dee, chat you guys through how not doing that. I mean, I always say, and I really mean it, that I have no idea how I wasn't fired. I was so lucky to retain my job for as long as I did as an audio producer. But yeah, I mean, I think Dee, I think we're probably best placed to concentrate on, unfortunately, recording remotely during a pandemic, because it's probably going to be, what we're doing for the next little while. So
it is.
I wanted to ask you was, I'm a big fan of the wardrobe studio, and within that, the wardrobes.
The concept of the wardrobe. I thought it was an actual studio in Soho or something. I was like, never heard of it.
I mean, if it's not already.
Pretty cool name though.
Yeah. Well, the wardrobe studio, I always recommend to people, because essentially you just want to go anywhere with soft furnishings, right? You want to soak up as many of those kind of sound waves as possible. But what would you say is the best, from an actual sound perspective, what would you say the best way for anyone here who wants to start a podcast? They're not really sure how, but they know they're, whether it's because of the pandemic or some other reason, they don't want to go to a studio, they want to do it at home. What's the best approach to
Sure. Just quickly, just to add to the previous point, quotes. Starting off your descriptions with a quote is great.
Great advice. That's great.
Yes, you can have that one for free. Anyway, right. So how would you record best at home? Yeah, I think the wardrobe concept basically says it all. Trying to find as small a space without it being too kind of claustrophobic is usually the best. So, if you've got a box room in your house, or if you've got a big living room where you could maybe kind of section a part of it off, again, just having enough space, say like for a table, depending on how many participants there are, that's always best. You want to stay away from windows, first off, because basically the one thing you want to avoid the most are catching reflections in your microphone. I'm trying to not sound too technical. So like things like echoes, and again, reflections are created from sound bouncing off of white walls mainly. And windows. So trying to avoid being anywhere near a window or white walls is great. If you can't avoid it, close your curtains in that room. because it drowns out outside noise, and also curtains act as a sound absorber, so that kind of helps the signal of the audio be as rich as possible. A nice setting, a nice comfortable table where you and your hosts can sit comfortably. Comfortability is a massive factor. If you're not sitting comfortably, you're not going to perform comfortably. These are really simple things, but I've seen some ridiculous setups where people kind of like lounged in a couch, kind of sitting next to each other with their mics kind of facing the other way. It's like, how do you expect to get a decent recording and have a decent conversation if you're always looking that way? Do you know what I mean? So let's just kind of like organizing yourself and your environment as best as possible is always best, of course. When it comes down to what else is there, I've got loads of notes here. Right, so in terms of the environment, I'd say that's kind of best. Small room, avoid reflections. Avoid sitting near windows. Right, in terms of equipment. Now, I mean, this is a bit of a rabbit hole depending on, how far down you want to go in terms of spending. But from a real basic point of view, as long as you've got a half decent laptop with enough hard drive space, which is key, because there's been many a times where I've been recording and realized I've got like 2 gigs left on my hard drive in the middle of a massive session. Not good. But a good enough laptop, whether it's a PC or Mac. I do advise Mac; they're just a bit tidier. With enough hard drive space and a good DAW, which stands for Digital Audio Workstation. You'd be good to go. And the one I recommend by far is one called Ableton Live. Again, I'm not going to go into the technicalities. Whoever's listening and whoever's interested, just go to Ableton, spell ABLETON.com. Fantastic piece of software, incredibly intuitive, incredibly powerful, and reasonably priced compared to a lot of others out there. Like, your mum could learn it in a day. It's not hard, genuinely. In terms of like doing basic recordings, you're not going to become like the next David Guetta. We don't need to learn it to that degree, is my point. But it's a very plug and play piece of software. So I recommend, that basically. Decent laptop, loads of hard drive space, Ableton Live. You're good to go from like a recording platform point of view. Mics. Now, this is where it can, you can get a bit crazed out, basically. I mean, like, there's 2 ways you can go, right? You can go down the route of sourcing a separate mic, good cabling, sound cards, which can get expensive, get confusing, and put you off the whole process, which is what a lot of people had to do up until recently. Until you were able to buy all-in-one solutions. So you've got 2 mics in particular, which are literally just plug and play USB mics, which have their own sound card built into them. They have their own volume control on them in terms of the loudness of the signal that it's picking up. And they also have headphone jacks on them as well. So they're doing the job of the mic and the sound card, and the USB cable just goes straight into your laptop. So you're avoiding having to, source a good sound card, learn how to use it, research into different cables, which is an absolute, head F, and go through an abundance of different types of mics, which have so many different kind of like nuances to them. It can just get a bit crazed out. So I would personally go for an all-in-one solution if you're just, just starting off and just want to kind of get cracking. And there's 2 mics in particular I would recommend. There's one called the Rode NT USB microphone. Type that into Google, you find that it will just pop up. It's around about £160. That's the less expensive one, but the quality is great nevertheless. The second choice, which is slightly more expensive, but my God, the build quality is fantastic. It's by a company called Apogee, spelled APOGEE. And it's called the Hype Mic. That's like top end. That's like, big boy stuff for the all-in-one solutions. It's around about £300, £310. And also bear in mind, if it's just you podcasting, you just need one. But, if you are serious about it, you're going to have to buy at least 2. So, just bear that in mind. But if you add up how much a decent sound card and then mics and then cables and all that's going to cost, same thing, like plus or minus a few quid here and there, I would go for the plug and play. Save the headache, just get on with it with the all-in-ones. And what else is there? So much, I have to write it down.
In terms of microphones, what do you find, is there a kind of microphone, if you saying that you're going to go super cheap and you're going to spend like £20 on a mic, is there a kind of mic you would avoid? Like that will be terrible in a podcasting environment?
Not really. Not really. I mean, like, look, to be completely honest, you can pick up your iPhone, press record, and you're podcasting. It's as simple as that. It really is, and, I was going to come onto this a bit later. We can talk as much as we want about technicalities and mics and stuff until we're blue in the face, but that doesn't mean anything unless you've got a really good podcast in terms of an actual conversation and a narrative and a message, and a brand at the end of the day, that will always supersede the quality. I think if it was a make or break situation, having a slightly dodgy sounding but incredibly engaging podcast will always win. Do you know what I mean? So if money is a bit of an issue, just pick up your phone, literally pick up your phone and start podcasting. And I think, as your audience builds and as your confidence builds, things kind of, I'm not saying they'll just work themselves out and everything will kind of just happen, but you'll find ways to progress your initiative and your operation. Yeah. The reason why I'm saying it is because I can't think of any specific mics to avoid. Every mic is good enough to, plug in and start recording. But if it is money that's an issue, use your phone. Honestly, use your phone. The mics on your phone are great. Just make sure it's, as close to you as possible. And you've got something half decent to say and you're off essentially,
And on that, you really don't. We always find that you don't really start learning your lessons and learning how to podcast until you start podcasting. So
exactly. Yeah.
Start doing it. And it was going to bring me on to another question I was going to ask, which might not be so technical, but this always has a fun answer from people. Is what's your one tip that you learned the hardest way? So I'll tell you what mine was. I recorded, when I was working in radio, I recorded a piece that went on for 2.5 hours and then forgot just how basic technology worked and went, oh, the batteries need changing. Completely forgot there was a stop button, completely forgot anything about it, lost it all, and learned it the very hard way. I got taking off. So I will never do that again. So what's the thing that you learned the hard way that you'll always remember? And it's also, I think it's really good for people to know that there will be something you learn the hard way. I'm sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. This sounds ridiculous, but so far so good. I've had many shags like producing audio outside of podcasts, I can tell you that much. Do you know what I mean? Like when I was in a studio which was running on a meter, I forgot to bloody top up the meter. So what happens halfway through a recording? Bosh, the whole thing just goes dead, blackout because of me. So that was hard. But with podcasting, I think, yeah, so far so good. The one thing I was going to talk about was the hard drive thing. That could have been an ultimate fail. That was when I was recording Reg and we were interviewing Maverick Sabre, big boy, an incredibly engaging conversation. And I noticed I had about 2 gigs. No, not even 2 gigs. I think I was on about 200 megs, and your computer needs at least 200 megs to be running its operating system. And it was just slowly just running out. And I was just like, what the? So I spent to my iTunes and just deleted the whole lot, like while it was recording. I had to. That was like 30 gigs. I just went, bosh, gone. So luckily, I was saved and the podcast was saved. I suppose the moral of the story is it's not how you fall, it's the way you land. If you are in a bit of a situation, learn how to think fast, because there's always a solution. Just don't panic, don't paralyze, just think and do, really, because there's always a way. There really is.
As we say in Ireland, it'll be grand.
Yeah, it will. Just going back to, there's one other thing which I think is just absolutely imperative when it comes to the recording process, mic technique. It's just so important. If you're going to go and spend, $2,000 on a setup, don't sit back here and record your podcasts. But don't sit like that and record your podcast. Do you know what I mean? Like, talk into your mic, and this links to the way you position yourself. So I've recorded some podcasts. Well, no, I haven't. When I first started, I did some shadowing, and I saw some ridiculous setups. Like the mic was set up here, but the guest was over there, so he's talking like this, and it's like, what are you doing? And then I had to do the editing. And it was just the quality of the signal was just awful, because all you heard was the side of his mouth going off and loads of reflection as well. So yeah, mic technique's absolutely key, and that half of that is down to the way you position your hosts and your guests. So ideally around a round table or just opposite as much as possible. You know, that kind of a scope is okay, you know, but just don't go like that. It's no point. Anyway, that's it.
And if you can at all, please use a mic stand because your hands
Yeah,
mix
do
so
my
much
yeah,
noise.
100%.
And you wave and we did an interview years ago with, I can't name them. They are so unbelievably famous. I can't name them. And they did the whole interview like this. Yeah, look, it's great when you're on stage.
Yeah. Oh, and another one. Yeah.
I can't tell them. Please, can you? I can't tell this famous singer. Please, can you use your microphone? I just couldn't do it. Well, what can you do? But
Or actually, even more of a reason to go, listen, stop waving about if you want a career after this podcast. Do you know what I mean? What was the other thing I was going to say? Headphones. Now, this is key. The reason why I say is because some of the new clients that I've had come on board who have never recorded anything in their entire life, they're like, oh, I don't really want to wear headphones. I'm like, it's not a choice. Hearing yourself back is absolutely key to be able to project to yourself. If you're not listening to yourself, you are not going to be in connection with your subconscious state of performance, you know, and you're not going to be aware of the whole technique aspect as well. When you're hearing yourself, you kind of gauge yourself and align yourself to deliver in the best way possible, and you maneuver yourself physically and mentally in accordance to that. So always make sure you're wearing headphones. If he or she doesn't like the headphones you've got, tell them to bring their own. It doesn't matter what they're wearing, in the ear headphones or whatever. Just wearing headphones is absolutely key. You know, Poppy, Rubina, I'm sure you know you can second that in terms of, you know, when you do a radio show.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. We've just learned so much. We've just been taking loads of notes as well, man.
Have you? All right, good.
We're writing stuff. We're writing stuff on our post-it notes.
Masterclass is in session. Yes. But yeah, sorry, go on.
I was just gonna say, you find that mostly with guests, don't you? That they tend to be uncomfortable with hearing their own voice, and that leads me perfectly onto a question I was going to ask about guests, because sometimes you can get the most incredible people with the most incredible stories to tell, but you know, it's like white coat syndrome, that microphone in front of them, their blood pressure shoots up and their heart rate rises and they just feel uncomfortable, or maybe they're not warmed up enough. So do you have any kind of tips for getting the best out of a guest?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Having a good conversation with them a day before. If you're able to do that, do it. You know, and it's just about the comfortability factor. You know, half the time it's not a case of people can't say what they want to say. It's just that they haven't had the time to organize their thoughts and their words, you know, unless they're extremely shy, and in which case they probably wouldn't even agree to do something like a podcast if it's not their thing. Like, nah, it's cool, I don't want to do it, right? But if they are and they just need a bit of guidance to kind of get themselves prepped, just a good kind of informal conversation the day before always helps. You know, or even like Joe Rogan, for example, you know, they're in the studio in the morning prepping for like 6 hours, 7 hours before they hit their record button, you know. So spending time with them and getting them comfortable in their own skin and in the environment, and, you know, in the context of what's about to, you know, be, is always key. And I think another thing as well, constantly reminding them that it's not live. It just takes a lot of subconscious pressure off of them, and even you sometimes. Do you know what I mean? It's not live radio. You're recording audio. It's offline. It's okay if you mess up. Don't worry. Like, it's, you know, doing pickups is a normal thing. All your big boys do it all the time. It's okay, you know. And making sure they're aware that it's a conversation, not an interview. Unless it is an interview, in which case, fine, it's an interview, you know. But if it is a conversation that you're trying to prepare them for, keep on reaffirming that. It's like, it's cool, we're just talking. Don't worry, you know. And also find...
Maybe it is the word. I was just gonna say, it's a very good point. Maybe it is the word interview, because we're
of course it is. Yeah. It's a massive psychological play. These are all psychological lines in your head, you know, that you have to learn to deal with and cross or not. And that's another thing, finding out what the guest is comfortable speaking about and equally not. So you know what to avoid and what to go in on. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, so it just comes down to prep. Sorry, yeah, go on.
Within reminding them that it isn't live, you know, if they do have
a massive thing
that they're not comfortable with, then fine, we can take it out. We can edit it out. So
I do it every time when I do an interview for my radio shows, and you know, they always go, "Oh yeah, oh yeah, it's cool, no worries, and they kind of like perk up and they're a bit more comfortable, you know. So yeah, it's a massive thing. It's a massive
And
thing.
then I suppose our last kind of technical question, and I'm going to put this the nice way first, and then I'm going to put the not so nice way second.
Yeah.
And so, what if you're going to narrow everything down to just one tip that is the a key to a successful podcast, what would it be? The not nice way of saying that is, what is the one annoying thing everybody should stop doing in podcasts? I can tell you what ours is.
Yeah.
Say it's Raycast, it's mine, is drink more water. Please stop getting
This is true, yeah. Here in the back of your throat, really close up to the mic, isn't very sexy at all, because you can hear all of that go off, right? Yeah, it's not very nice. I personally think spending time finding your voice and your sense of authenticity is absolutely key. You have no podcast unless you don't know who you are. Okay, not who you are, but the substance of what you want to say and convey as a consistent message in your podcast. If you're planning to do more than one, which I'm sure you are. So spending time finding your voice is paramount over the best mic, the best sound card, all of that secondary. It really is. And all I advise anyone to do is pick up the phone and start recording, and then listen back to yourself relentlessly, get used to the sound of your own voice. Learn to self-criticize, but don't over-edit yourself, because then you can fall into a bit of a mental funk. Do you know what I mean? Self-edit, there's this very fine line between kind of constructively feeding back to yourself and then like hacking at yourself and self-editing to the point where like you don't know what the hell to say anymore, kind of thing. Do you know what I mean? So it's about kind of developing that psychological nuance of handling yourself and developing yourself to find that authentic place and to find your voice and the best way to deliver it. And also, don't wait until you're perfect, because you're never going to be perfect ever. You just need to be good enough to start. And thing is, look, no one ever expects to hear the perfect voice, because A, it doesn't exist, and B, people like to listen to the journey. They want to hear the documentation of your progress. That's the beauty of podcasting. Do you know what I mean? It's unadulterated, unedited, kind of, if you know what I mean. And it's the journey that you take your listener on, who are going to grow with you, essentially, So just get yourself to that point where you feel authentic enough and confident enough to take your voice public, and roll out from there, essentially. And everyone's got the only tool they need, which is their phone. You've got a phone, you've got a mic, press record, start talking. That's it.
That's some really
nice.
That's it. That's genuinely it.
Inspiring. I love you. Great.
Rubina,
Hope that helped.
Yeah, no, it really
helped us. It helped us.
Yeah.
But do you guys have anything any tips that you could give for what do you think was one really instrumental thing for you guys in the success of your podcast? It's just a simple throwaway question, not like a big meaningful question to end it all with.
I think what you were saying about authenticity and what you want to say, and the fact that we were so unfiltered and so raw and so honest.
That is your authenticity at the end of the day, isn't it?
It really is. And I think you really hit a point there, because obviously we had our producer to kind of rein us in when we went off tangent, but like...
Big up Calic. No, he wasn't producing you, was he? Yeah.
But I really do think that is what it was. I mean, our first episode, we were like verbal diarrhea, talking about everything. And then suddenly we were like, right, layers, subject, theme, thread. Like you can veer off, come back, veer off, come back, but know what the top question is, know what the overall theme is. Like in this episode, what is our journey? What are we discovering about each other? And sort of staying true to that. Definitely.
Yeah, it's like be yourself, right?
It's so cliche.
And be okay to be weird and odd, because people are going to listen to you. Like, because you have a story to tell, because everybody does.
Our problem was we were laughing. We were like cackle. Every 3 minutes would be a cackle. We'd be like, oh yeah, come back.
You know what? Actually, you just made me think of quite an important point. If you're doing it DIY and you're doing everything from start to end, fine, go for it. But if you are able to afford the privilege of a producer, and by that I don't mean like paying someone £100 an hour to do editing for you. Maybe it could be a mate who comes on board and takes on that role. That would allow you just to literally just go blah, let it all out. Let it all out, and you're going to have someone else there satelliting the whole process and helping you learn, not even helping you learn, I suppose, in a sense, learning themselves how to edit you. Do you know what I mean? Like you always end up making a better product if there's more than one head, involved. So if you are able to have someone on board who can learn how to produce you, fantastic.
Yeah.
Because that takes a bit more pressure off of you to get everything perfect. You don't want to be perfect, because the second you put that pressure on yourself, you kind of like trade a bit of fun. You trade the fun aspects, and you've got to be having a good time doing it. Otherwise, it will sound like Radio 2. No disrespect to Radio 2, they're fantastic, but you know what I mean. Like that's not podcasting. Has got to be your personality in its most comfortable and happiest state, essentially. Setting up everything for that is key.
I saw a really great tweet once that said, "My friends are so funny, I don't edit them," and then the reply said, "Yeah, but someone should." And I think
there you go. Right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think
that was so useful. Thank you.
One of the things that I think we've learned most of doing all of these A classes over the past year and a half is that the big barrier to people starting podcasts is actually just doing it.
Yes.
Like people have been talking about, I should be doing a podcast. I've got a great idea for a podcast, and they go to a masterclass like this, but actually doing it is a big step. So little things, it's like, just get started. You don't have to invest thousands of pounds. You can just start on your phone. Some of the best podcasts in the world sound terrible. I mean, they shouldn't be.
There are some huge players out there. There are some huge names out there recording on the most hideous of devices. They're horrid. That sounds horrible, but it really doesn't matter.
You're a good podcast is a good podcast.
Really care. I'm not discounting my job at all. Of course not. You're a good producer. Come to me. Point being, but I'm saying like you can get on with the most basic equipment. You really can, and then grow to that point where it's like, all right, now let's really think about the sonics and see what I can afford to make happen. Sorry, but I'm going to stop biting in now.
Oh, no, on that point, it tends to be, if you are somebody who wants to get into podcasting, you're probably quite a creative person. And if you're quite a creative person, you probably have some creative friends. So use your network as well. So that guy who does some music in his spare time, get him to do your little jingle for you. You've got that designer friend who likes to do doodles, get him to do your cover art. Like, you don't have to do this all yourself. You can, lean on other people, and like you say, if you do have the joy of having someone else listen to your stuff and be critical for you, that's really useful as well, just so you can get someone else's perspective. But the first rule of podcasting is to start podcasting. I think that's what we've all learned here. So I'm going to end this with a big question for all of you guys. What is your big podcast recommendation? So whether that's from an Asian voice or not, what podcast are you loving right now that we all can start listening to? I'll start with you, Poppy.
Oh, wow. I really like Asian Networks. Where Are You Really From?
Yes.
My friend Sean is on there, and it's just funny and irreverent and just cuts through the fat, gets straight to the point, and it's a funny listen. And I can't do the 4-hour like listening to every laugh, cough, and I need tight, slick production. So it's like bang, 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 and it's a great listen. So I would recommend that.
Fab. Rubina.
I've been listening to a lot of Hidden Brain, which is an NPR podcast by Shankar Vedanta, which is a science meets storytelling podcast, and it's wonderful. It's like they let the stories just amazing, like human stories, and the science is kind of light, and it's a great way for me to feel like I'm learning when I'm just walking down the street.
And how about you, Dee? Anything?
Oh, God.
Reggie Yates podcast.
That's about Reggie's great.
Everything.
You're gonna kill me. I don't actually have any podcasts that I listen to outside the ones I produce, because as you can imagine, I listen to a lot of podcasts while making them, right? So, I mean, it's a bit of a shameless plug, but nevertheless, if we just put that to the side for a second, Business Without BS, right, is fantastic for people who, whether you're into business or not, what you're going to get is this completely stripped back, no BS approach to conversations about so many aspects of business, which is delivered in such a digestible, palatable form. And it's just so educational. It genuinely is. I'm talking everything from tax to sustainability to IT to law to video gaming to God, what else is there? Auctioning. So many different aspects of business spoken about like normal people. Do you know what I mean? Which just makes it so much more palatable. It takes the intimidating part out of trying to understand those quite specialist niche subjects. And therefore makes it so much enjoyable to learn about them. You know, there were 16 episodes in now, and I've genuinely enjoyed producing that over anything else so far, because I'm learning so much as well. And I'm not a tax lawyer, but I know a lot about tax now. I can tell you that much. You know,
you're a one-man band, audio production,
basically,
tax,
yeah,
the whole shebang.
Yeah, the whole lot. So I would genuinely recommend that. I mean, it's not a massive podcast; it's tiny. We've just started, but I can see the appeal, you know, across the board. You don't have to be into business to love it, and that's why it's great. So check that out.
Thank you for the recommendations. Well, thank you so much, guys, for joining us. This has been a really lovely hour and a bit. Hopefully what we've done is be able to give some inspiration, some tips and tricks. And also don't forget, so for everyone watching, there's that code you can use on acast.com, acast-exclusive. That's acast-exclusive. We will send that in an email after this so you can sign up for free. But basically the message here is just get going. I think that's the moral of the story. So thank you very much, Dee, for all of your audio technical expertise.
Hope it's
thank
helped.
you, Poppy, and thank you, Rubina, for your time.
Thank you.
Hope you're have a lovely evening. And Jen over in Ireland, thank you very much for your time as well and all of your insight. And have a lovely evening, guys.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.